Hello and welcome to my channel, and today I'm reviewing this book by Virginia Giuffre called Nobody's Girl. And for those that don't know, which I'm sure all of you do, but I just better mention it anyway, this is the lady that accused Prince Andrew, the then Prince Andrew, who is now Andrew, of child sexual abuse. She also took on Ghislaine Maxwell, and she also took on Jeffrey Epstein. So I've done a few excerpts from the book. I've talked about personal experiences which I can relate to, and I've talked about the reasons why I would purchase the book or not purchase the book and what my opinions are on it. So without any further ado, here is the review.
Virginia writes about her abuse from a very young age, and it was actually from her father, who was also letting his friend abuse her as well. And it sounds absolute, you can't contemplate it. It's absolutely disgusting, and people were turning around and turning a blind eye, and you think, well, they couldn't do that. Well, they do. And this is what happened with my ex. He got charged with 9 counts of child sexual abuse, and it's amazing how many people will defend them even when charged. And from my experience, it's always mature women. And there's even one that befriended him that I know of, was never friends when we were together, but befriended him after he got charged. It's absolutely amazing that they will stand there and they will turn a blind eye. And I've seen it when I was getting assaulted, that men or women, but when I got assaulted, it was actually a man, that will turn a blind eye. And this is what Virginia writes. So she's been at a party and she's getting walked home by an age-appropriate boy, and her dad pulls up and he goes, "What the fuck are you doing?" My father screamed from the driver's seat. I could tell from the high keen of his voice that he was drunk. My gracious escort looked as if he might swallow his tongue. "I'm sorry, sir," he stammered. "I didn't do anything. I'm just walking Jenna home." But my dad wasn't listening. "Get the fuck out of here," Dad ordered, stepping towards the boy. And then he turned on me. "You're a fucking slut," he said, as he threw me into the van. Back at the campsite, Dad kept up with his yelling, calling me a dirty whore, an ungrateful piece of shit and worse. I'd heard it all before, but that night I snapped. "What, you think you're the only one who's allowed to touch me?" I asked, my voice loud. My mum was inside the camper out of earshot. But if I was going to finally call Dad out, I wanted to make sure at least my uncles and aunts could hear. "This guy's been fucking me for years, since I was a little kid," I yelled in their direction. "And no one's done shit about it." I wish I could say that they all stood up then to form a protective barrier around me, but they didn't move. So after a startled silence, Dad grabbed me by the neck with one hand and punched me in the face with the other. Then he shoved me into the borrowed camper where he'd been all sleeping, and continued beating me until my lips were split open and one of my eyes was swollen shut. Skydie tried to come in to help me, but he was too little to do too much. Finally, I got Dad off me by kicking him in the groin, and the beating stopped. He'd worn himself out raging at me. The next morning, I woke up thinking that since I finally revealed my father's abuse out loud, something would have to change. Maybe at the very least, someone would acknowledge what I'd been through. Instead, before we left to drive back to Florida, the entire extended family acted as if nothing had happened. "You want some bacon and eggs?" Aunt Peggy, not actually my aunt but a family friend we'd been told to call her that, asked me when I emerged, black and blue, from wherever I'd passed out. She offered me some Perricket. Then my family piled in our van, and I sought out my blanket in the back. The people who've never experienced anything like this will think, well, they couldn't have all stood by, surely. I mean, that's absolutely outrageous. But people do when it comes to feathering their own nest. And I had one woman, and she came down to my yard, and she told me how my ex had been abusive to her. She used to rent a house off him. She moved with the horses and everything, a big move to another area. I went and visited her in a new home, and she was miles away. And then suddenly I found out from somebody, they said, oh, she's back down there. It just happened to be when he'd been charged with 9 counts of child sexual abuse. So obviously he talked around, and she went as a witness. So they'd feathered their own, each had feathered their own nest. And there are people that will not prioritise child abuse over the morals, basically. And this is exactly what's happened here. She then goes on to write later on that she'd forged a fragile peace with her mother and father. You wonder how victims could do this, but they do. And also when they're reliant on them, when they've got nowhere else to live. But it was actually a father that got a job at Mar-a-Lago, which is owned by Donald Trump. And the father introduced her to Mr. Trump. And it says, they weren't friends, but Dad worked hard and Trump liked that. I'd seen photos of them posing together and shaking hands. So one day my father took me to Trump's office. "This is my daughter," Dad said, and his voice sounded proud. Trump couldn't have been friendlier, telling me it was fantastic that I was there. Do you like kids, he asked. Do you babysit at all? He explained that he owned several houses next to the resort that he lent to his friends, many of whom had children who needed tending. I said yes, I'd babysat before, admitting the fact the last time I'd done so I'd been reprimanded. In an attempt to entertain the kids in my care, I'd ignited some fireworks I found hidden in the house. Clearly I was right to leave that out, because soon I was making extra money a few nights a week minding the children of the elite. So that's all she says about Trump, and obviously she speaks quite pleasantly about him. But then she goes on to when she meets Ghislaine, and it says, "Hello," the woman says warmly. She looks to be in her late 30s, and her British accent reminds me of Mary Poppins. I couldn't tell you which designer she was wearing, but I bet her purse cost more than my dad's truck. The woman extends her manicured hand for me to shake. "Ghislaine Maxwell," she says, pronouncing her first name Ghislaine. Her grip is firm. I point to my name tag. "I'm Jenna," I say, smiling like I've been told to smile. Mar-a-Lago employers are required to make guests feel welcome. The woman's eyes are light on my book, which I've jammed with sticky notes. "Are you interested in massage?" she asks. How wonderful. Remembering my duties, I offer this mesmerising woman a beverage, and she chooses hot tea. I go and fetch it, returning with a steaming cup. I expect that to be the end of it, but the woman keeps on talking. Maxwell says she knows a wealthy man, a long-time Mar-a-Lago member, she says, who is looking for a massage therapist to travel with him. "Do you do massage on the side?" she asks. "Oh no," I reply, worried I've given her the wrong impression. "I'm not trained, but I hope to learn someday. My lack of experience doesn't concern her a bit. I'm sure you'll be terrific," she insists, looking me up and down. "Will you come for an interview?" I glance at my library book with its illustrations of muscles and tendons. "I don't think I know the body well enough yet," I protest. But Maxwell shakes her head. "What's important," she says, "is my desire to learn. If I impress her friend," she says, "he'll happily pay to get me trained. He's a mathematician, a genius with a knack for making money. He loves to help people," she says, adding that the rich gentleman's home is right here in Palm Beach, less than 2 miles from Mar-a-Lago. "Come meet him," she says, her pretty face glowing. "Come tonight after work." So this is the start of it, when she obviously goes and meets Epstein. Then it goes on considerably and quite in depth about the abuse. I mean, it's quite sickening, so I won't read anything about that, but be aware of that if you're going to read the book. It does go quite in depth into what he and she did to her. So she spent about 2 years with Epstein and Maxwell, and as she says, she wasn't locked in or the doors weren't bolted, but she was a prisoner trapped in an invisible cage. So psychologically, they got her locked in there, which often happens with victims. And then she has had therapy, and she said one thing she didn't realise was when she had therapy, that when children are abused by people that they love, as she had been by her father, they start to believe that love and pain, love and betrayal, love and violation all go together. And she says, "I didn't know that abuse victims struggle to see red flags because they've become desensitised to inappropriate behaviour." And she didn't know what a common coping mechanism was of this during sexual abuse is to distance oneself what is happening in the moment, to split into parts. And you often find this with victims. They'll deny actually what's happened to them, or some of them will actually, love the actual abuser because the mind has become so damaged, and this is what they'd psychologically done to her and trapped her in. Because a lot of people that have no understanding or uneducated say, "Well, why didn't they just leave?" But it doesn't quite work like that. I find the start of chapter 11 a bit strange, because she talks about Adam Perry Lang, and she said that he was often there and he would later become a celebrity chef renowned for his barbecue. But in the early 2000s, he excelled at the healthy fare Epstein required: tofu, fish, kebabs, hummus, etc. And she puts, "I liked Lang because he treated me and Epstein's other girls as human beings. Even if I was standing naked in front of him, which was not unusual since Epstein preferred us that way. When we were on the island, Lang would look me in the eye and ogle me. He also snuck me food when there was not on Epstein's approved menu. The first time Lang asked me what I was hungry for, he threw together my favourite food, pizzas, as if it was nothing. After that, I didn't even have to ask. When I finished attending to Epstein or one of the other guests, Lang would have a cheesy hot pie waiting. I'd jump up on a stool, he'd hand me a beer and we'd talk for a bit." So I can't understand this, because not only, you can't say that, if it is obviously true what she's saying, that she was walking about naked because you know, that's what Epstein liked. That's not normal in any way, shape or form. So why didn't he say something? Even though he wasn't, there's no mention of him carrying out any abuse whatsoever. He was an enabler, wasn't he? He obviously clearly knew what was going on, if this book is to be believed. It's just utter madness. But yet she doesn't talk to him, because he's been nice to her and he hasn't sexually abused her. She doesn't talk to him about him in any bad terms. She talks to him actually in quite glowing terms. I find other bits uncomfortable, and I don't know where I stand on this. So it says, so I began to do the worst thing I'd ever done in my life. I drafted other girls into Epstein's sickening world. I knew it was wrong, but I nationalised my behaviour by telling myself that at least I levelled with the girls I approached. Unlike Kellen, whose pitch made an encounter with Epstein seem not just lucrative but fun, I warned each potential recruit that they'd have to strip naked during the massage, and that the rich man they'd be servicing could sometimes expect more intimate physical contact. But the fact that I issued warnings doesn't diminish the ugly truth. When I targeted girls who were hungry or poor, I knew I was exploiting their vulnerabilities. I stooped so low that I even bore Epstein a few friends of mine to abuse. No one ever turned me down. My friends had seen my nice apartment, and those who said yes, I think, wanted to believe servicing Epstein would be easy money. Now, I find this very hard. So where is the balance between somebody that's a victim and somebody that is exactly the same as Maxwell and is procuring young girls for sex with Epstein? Because that's exactly what he's doing. So one of them's locked in, obviously she's died, has Virginia, but she won't be locked in jail, but yet she's done the same. So I find that very, very difficult, and where you get the balance from. And I was reading a book ages ago. I didn't actually read it because I didn't want to give the person the money for it. It was on Amazon, but you could get a bit from it to read. And it was a person that said, from being abused to the abuser and back again, and they condoned it to be okay because they had realised they'd done wrong. So they'd been sexually abused, and they used this excuse that because they'd been sexually abused, they then went on to be an abuser themselves, but then they realised it was wrong, and they're saying back to being the victim. Well, so I put a comment on, because I found it quite sick. I said, you can't make an excuse. There are millions of people who are sexually abused, and they don't go on to abuse other people. And if they do, you can't make an excuse. Oh, I was sexually abused, so I can go on and abuse. Anyway, they gave quite a nasty comment on my book, which was obviously about Billy building a boat, so there was nothing wrong with it. But they didn't understand. They tried to put my book down. Amazon removed it because it was obvious that it was malicious. But this is what I mean. Where do you draw the line? And it turns me a bit just reading that. It doesn't sit comfortable with me. So the book ends on Prince Andrew, and I don't know if there's much more than what's on the internet that's in the book. One thing that I don't know if this is on the internet, but it was sort of like news to me really, was that a lady called Giuffre Walker came public, and she admitted that she had remembered seeing Giuffre dancing with Prince Andrew at the Tramp nightclub in 2001, just as she always said. Walker, who had already given a written statement to the FBI, said she would happily testify against the prince if the lawsuit came to trial. A lawyer would later tell The Guardian that Walker remembered the night clearly because she never saw a royal before or since. She says Prince Andrew was happy, smiling and dancing, and Virginia did not look happy. And I'll just read this last section, and this is Lady Victoria Hervey. Now, perpetrators always have their useful idiots, and as far as I'm concerned, this one has been Prince Andrew. So they have gone out of their way whilst the person sits back. And I know Prince Andrew has got an obviously terrible reputation, but a lot of these perpetrators, they don't have that terrible reputation because they're not that well known. So if you look at our case on a smaller level where the perpetrator isn't famous, they get people to go out and do their dirty work and say stuff, useful idiots, and then people think they're awful and attack them, or they might attack the victim and end up getting a police record. I'm saying attack, could be physical, but usually verbal. So they go out to the victim saying, oh, you're a liar, you're this, you're effing that, you're a false allegation, and the victim calls the police and they get the criminal record whilst the perpetrator sits pretty, and we call them useful idiots. And this is obviously what Lady Victoria Hervey, in my opinion, has been for Prince Andrew, and this is just the section of what she's written. And she says, the prince was not without his supporters. On January the 31st, a former girlfriend of his, a socialite named Lady Victoria Hervey, took to Instagram to say that in her opinion I was a complete whore. Then, just in case anyone had forgotten that this story is not just about sexual abuse but also about class, she added that I was just a ghetto opportunity who seriously mixed up, never one to shirk her public duty. Lady Victoria, the daughter of the 6th Marquess of Bristol, half sister of the 7th Marquess, and sister of the 8th Marquess, whatever all that means, will give many more spirited interviews about me in the coming months. And I've heard some of them, and they are horrible. And she's obviously, name calling and things like that. But I just thought it was funny where she goes on, Marquess of Marcus and the 8th Marquess of what, and she goes, whatever that means. So would I recommend buying it? Well, it depends. It depends what you want out of it. If you want to read about a backstory and how she grew up and her family and the family that she lived with and the father of her children, yes, buy it by all means. But the majority of the stuff that's in there, if you're just looking at what happened with Prince Andrew and Maxwell and Epstein, I think would say all of it nearly is in the public domain anyway. So it's not really worth reading. You're not going to find out anything really new. The other thing is as well, unfortunately, obviously she's passed away, so the money isn't going to her. I'd have a different outlook on it if she was still alive and the money was going to her, because in my opinion you cannot give enough money to a victim of child sexual abuse. What they've gone through is absolutely horrific. They're never going to get over it in any way, and nobody can get them to get over it at all. They can deal with it better, they can function better with it, but they're still going to be there with them. And money is the only thing. Money is the only compensation, hence why they get paid out money, because there's nothing else you can give them. So if she was still alive, I'd say, yeah, just buy it, just so that you got some money. Because if you turn around to anybody within any sense and said, right, you can have $1 billion if I can sexually abuse you, you're not going to say yes, because obviously nobody wants sexually abusing. So there is nothing you can offer them enough to make them have a life after what they've gone through. So what she's gone through and the other victims is absolutely horrific as far as I'm concerned. And as I say, we've been through this with our perpetrator, and no amount of money would cover the fact of what he's done. It's absolutely disgusting, and I know the pain that victims go through. So but it's doing very well, is the book. It says on the bookseller that its headline is Virginia Roberts takes the crown, nobody's a girl assumes top spot, and apparently it had a 49.4 boost in sales and has ascended to the top of the official UK top 50. So well done there. And yeah, that's it. So get it or not. Hope you've enjoyed listening to my take on it and the little bits that I've put out. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.